Hello. In this video, we are going to talk about cookies. It's a good time for this discussion because Google has just announced that they are depreciating third-party cookies on Chrome this year in 2024. The reaction to this in the marketing and analytics industry has been all over the map. I would say it has been an overreaction to this announcement by Google. And we're going to do a deep dive into how cookies work from a technical perspective. So that way, hopefully, you'll be able to see that these, what I would say are overreactions, really are not going to impact your marketing and analytics efforts very much. So without further ado, let's jump in. To understand how cookies work, first we have to understand how the internet works. I don't mean how the signals are sent through fiber cables or anything like that. I mean how the internet works at a fundamental level from a website perspective, right? This is what's critical from a marketing and analytics perspective. It's this diagram that you see right here. Fundamentally, the internet works with a client and a server making HTTP requests and response between the two. What does that mean? The client, that's the browser on your desktop or the mobile app on your phone or the browser on your phone. It also technically includes things like IoT devices, but those aren't relevant for our discussion here. They make an HTTP request to a server. Now, 20 years ago, a server was literally a computer sitting in a room somewhere, often in the same room as the developer of the website. These days, it's managed by very complicated cloud services like AWS that spin up servers and all these different options. You've heard of serverless, you've heard of edge functions, things like that. All of those things, those are all, despite the name serverless, are fundamentally still servers in the context of this drawing. What I mean is that there is a computer somewhere in the world that is responding to HTTP requests from clients. That is what a server is for the purposes of our discussion. And that fundamental relationship has not changed since the 90s. Despite all of the changes with single page apps and cloud services and mobile devices and everything, it is still fundamentally a client makes an HTTP request to a server, and the server responds with an HTTP response. That is fundamentally how the internet works. Now, the important thing about how the internet works is these HTTP requests are anonymous. They are fundamentally anonymous. That means that the internet is fundamentally anonymous. What I mean by anonymous is there's no requirement that the server can impose that says the client has to identify itself before making an HTTP request. This computer that's sitting somewhere, probably on AWS's cloud, is just sitting there and receiving all HTTP requests that come its way and processing them. That's all it's doing and returning an HTTP response. So what this looks like in concrete practical terms is that the client, let's say a browser, Chrome browser on a laptop in this case, makes an HTTP request by typing in to the browser mystore.com. We're going to use Shopify as an example here because that's what most of our clients use. But all of this discussion is going to apply whether or not you use Shopify or build your own infrastructure, whether you're running a direct-to-consumer brand or you're running some crazy AI startup. All of this is going to apply to how the internet works, right? So the client makes an HTTP request. In this case, they go to the page mystore.com, and that results in an HTTP request from the client made to the server mystore.com. Now, in our case, for Shopify, our servers are managed by Shopify. So the Shopify code says, someone wants the page mystore.com. Return an HTTP response with the HTML and JavaScript required for the browser, in this case Chrome, to render mystore.com. That is what happens here. And like I said, that HTTP request is completely anonymous at this point. The server does not know anything about the client, right? All it knows is it requested the store mystore.com. It checked and made sure that that page was not authenticated in any way, doesn't require any information. So it returned the JavaScript. That's what it did. All right. So Cool. So what happens with cookies? What are cookies in this context? Well, like I said, the key thing about this request is that it's anonymous. The server doesn't know anything about the user. So let's say Jake is going to his Chrome browser and going to mystore.com, right? The server doesn't know anything about Jake. It doesn't know that his email is jake@gmail.com. It doesn't know his Facebook password. It doesn't know anything relevant about Jake at the point that this HTTP request is made. But what it does do is it says, this is a Shopify store. So if the person making this HTTP request, if the client making this HTTP request is going to add an item to their cart in the future, I need to be able to associate that add to cart with this page view. And so what the server does is it says, when it sends over this JavaScript back over to the client, it tells the client, the browser, in this case, Chrome, in this case, hey, the JavaScript says, hey, set a cookie called client ID, and I'm simplifying here, but set a cookie called client ID equal to the value 123 ABC. Really just any random string of numbers. It has to be a random string of numbers because the server doesn't know anything about Jake at this point. All it knows is that this random HTTP request came in from some Chrome browser somewhere in the world. And so what the server does is it says, store a client ID called 123ABC and then in a database somewhere, and tell in the HTTP response, tell the client to store that HTTP request, that cookie client ID 123ABC in the browser. So what Chrome does is it runs that JavaScript and it stores a client ID equal to 123ABC on the Chrome browser for mystore.com. That is what a cookie is. A cookie is stored on the browser. It can be used for anything. It's really just a persistent storage on the browser, on the client, right? And often we use it to identify individual clients from the server so that when Jake, now in his Chrome browser, he's gone to mystore.com, he's looked at the page, decided he wanted to buy my product, and so he adds the product to cart. Now, when the client sends over the HTTP request to add the cart to add a product to his cart to mystore.com, to the server for running mystore.com, he includes the client ID. The browser includes the client ID 123ABC, and the server goes and says, 123ABC is your client ID. I see that I have that stored in my database. So you are the same client that made this HTTP request earlier when I knew nothing about you. And that is very critical for attribution. This is how all attribution works. No matter what the platform is, there is a initial landing page view that comes from Facebook, or the person entered it directly into their browser, or Google, or wherever, right? That first page view hits the server, and then the server responds with a cookie. The client sets the cookie, and then when the user later adds an item to their cart, because it has the same client ID, the server says, okay, this add to cart is the same client that viewed that page earlier, right? So that's how all attribution works. We're going to do another deep dive on how attribution works, but it's critical from a cookie perspective to understand that that's what's happening here. So the client, Jake, goes to the website, adds the item to the cart. That HTTP request is sent over to the server. The server says, yes, client ID 123ABC. I see that you've added something to the cart, and it responds with the cart update. In the case of Shopify, this is all happening with Ajax, so it's not a full post back. That doesn't matter, right? What matters is the client ID is being shared between the client and the server. So that way the client, the server, knows, hey, when I render an experience for this client, remember that they have this item in their cart in this case, right? So that is how checkouts work, is Shopify sets a cookie and it returns the cookie, right? With every HTTP request, the client and the server exchange the cookie, so that way the server knows, hey, this person has the item in their cart or these items in their cart. They're going through the checkout funnel. We know what items they're trying to buy. What that means is that cookies are fundamental to how we experience the internet. They're not some ancillary thing that's only used by Facebook to track people or nefarious spam artists out there to track information. They are used very legitimately to make websites function the way that they work. Now, I want to point out that this is still an anonymous request, right? By that, I mean there's no personally identifiable information here available. If you look carefully at what happened, the client requested the page from mystore.com. The server said, I'll render that page for you. By the way, when you're rendering that page, set this client ID cookie so I can identify you later. And then the client says, okay, here's my client ID, Mr. Server, right? Please give me the rendered experience specific to this client ID. And the server says, okay, here it is. At no point can we identify Jake as Jake. We don't know anything about Jake. Why? Because the browser, Chrome, is not going to give us Jake's Chrome login information or anything. And the only way we can learn that Jake is Jake, the only way we can get personally identifiable information in this arrangement is by asking him for it. So we can ask for Jake's email address when he subscribes to a newsletter, and he can get a discount code or something if we do that, right? In that case, now we can associate jake@gmail.com with this client ID 123ABC. But notice the important thing that happened here. Jake volunteered that information to us. We did not collect it in the background. We didn't do anything like that. Jake is fully aware that he is giving us his email address so that way we can send him promotions later on, right? That is a fully voluntary thing that Jake has done. It's nothing nefarious happening in the background. The client ID is just identifying the client so that way we can give Jake the experience that he needs. All right, cool. To make a purchase or something. Cool. All right. So that is what cookies are. That specifically, everything we just talked about is a first-party cookie. Now, first-party cookies, the difference between a first-party cookie and a third-party cookie, there's no second-party cookie that I'm aware of. The difference between a first-party cookie and a third-party cookie is the domain that can access the cookie. So the way that this works is when we sent this client ID over, when we set that client ID, we set it to the domain mystore.com. That means that anything rendered on mystore.com, Chrome, the browser, the client, will allow to read that cookie client ID. All right. Cool. What that means is when Jake goes from mystore.com over to facebook.com, Facebook cannot read that client ID. Facebook is not allowed because it's a different domain. Domains are very important in the context of this HTTP relationship that we talked about at the very beginning, right? And we're going to go into depth a little bit more on them here in a minute. Cool. So they're very important here because they distinguish first-party cookies from third-party cookies. A third-party cookie, on the other hand, can be read across domains. So when your Facebook pixel sets a third-party cookie, it can read that third-party cookie on mystore.com. If I have the Facebook pixel installed on mystore.com, it can read that Facebook ID cookie, for instance, on mystore.com, and it can read it on facebook.com. All right. Now, why is that important? That is important because Facebook will set this and say, okay, now if Jake has a Facebook account, Facebook knows lots of personal information about Jake. And most importantly, it knows Jake's email address. And it knows from the Facebook ID that's installed, from the Facebook ID third-party cookie installed on mystore.com, it knows that Jake did some stuff on mystore. Maybe he made a purchase, maybe he didn't, right? These third parties cookies are what's going away. They have been going away for a very long time, right? This is nothing new. They've been slowly depreciated by Chrome. It's not like the Facebook has been relying on this and this is the core part of Facebook technology for the past 10 years. No, Facebook is much cleverer than that, and they are not going to rely on third-party cookies anymore, right? This is what Chrome is killing. And it's because while Facebook has been a very, I would say, good actor in this space, there's the potential for lots of abuse of third-party cookies. So they're going away, right? You won't be able to use the Facebook third-party cookie anymore, right? So how is the Facebook pixel going to work if it doesn't use a third-party cookie? Well, what it does is it uses a first-party cookie. And the way that that works is on Facebook, when Jake clicks on a Facebook ad, you'll notice that there's a little thing in that URL that takes it to mystore.com. There's a URL parameter called fbclid, Facebook Click ID is what it stands for. And it's a big long string of numbers, right? What Facebook does is when Jake is in the Facebook app, it knows that Jake is Jake because he's logged into Facebook, right? When the Facebook generates the URL for that ad, it adds the Facebook Click ID. So that way it knows, it says, hey, anytime somebody clicks that button, store in the database that Jake clicked this Facebook Click ID. Then, because that's added to the URL, right, on mystore.com, the Facebook pixel that I've installed on mystore.com can read that Facebook Click ID, store it as a first-party cookie, right? And then when Jake subsequently makes a purchase, the Facebook pixel will send a notification to Facebook that says, hey, someone made a purchase on mystore.com with this click ID. And then Facebook will then associate, I know this click ID was Jake, right? And that's how it can associate the two. And that is the sort of thing that iOS has disrupted, is the ability for Facebook to track those users across sites like that using first-party cookies. That is a whole entire different topic. We could delve into that. But from the standpoint of this discussion, what it means is that Facebook no longer depends on the third-party cookies that it sets. It has not done that for a long time, right? Cool. All right. So what that means is your Facebook pixel is not going to suddenly break when Google removes the ability to set cookies on the Chrome browser. If you're looking for the high-level takeaway, that's what it is. All right, cool. There's one other topic that often comes up when we talk about third-party cookies or the removal of cookies. Lots of agencies out there start pitching their clients on, well, you know, cookies are going away. So what we need to do is we need to move to a server-side integration. To be honest with you, a server-side integration has nothing to do with third-party cookies going away. There's nothing about a server-side integration that will change the fact of the way the Facebook pixel works from a third-party cookie. Third-party cookies are going away. There's nothing you can do about it, right? What a server-side integration will do is it will allow cross-origin requests to Facebook, right? So let's talk about what that is. So similar to the way that a third-party cookie can be read across domains, you'll see here that domains are very important in the context of the cookie, and they're very important in the context of these HTTP requests that go back and forth. Okay, cool. They're also important in the types of requests that we can make. So when you install the Facebook pixel on your site, whether it uses a third-party cookie or a first-party cookie, the client is still on mystore.com, and the Facebook pixel will make an HTTP request to facebook.com servers. We are going from mystore.com to facebook.com. That is what's called a cross-origin request, right? And that can be blocked by ad blockers, by Apple, by basically everybody. So the difference is when the client is on mystore.com and they make an HTTP request to my Shopify store, which is also on mystore.com, that is a same origin request. And basically everything goes in a same origin request. Why? Because we need same origin requests to operate the internet the way everybody has become accustomed to the way the internet works. They're fundamental to the way the internet works, just like cookies. Cookies and first-party cookies and same origin requests are in the same neighborhood of just the way the internet works. Third-party cookies like this and cross-origin requests are often used to send data to marketing platforms. And that's why Google and GDPR and all of these things want to crack down on them. Cool. So what server-side integrations will do is they will not do anything for you to become cookieless or whatever the latest phrase is there. What server-side integrations do is they allow you to proxy requests. So we can take this cross-origin request to Facebook and we can turn it into a same origin request. So again, the client's on mystore.com. Now, instead of sending that pixel hit directly to facebook.com, the client sends it to mystore.com. This is the regular operating of the internet. Nobody can block that same origin request. So it goes to mystore.com and then mystore.com sends it over to facebook.com in a server to server integration. This is called proxying requests. What it does is from the client's perspective, everything is going to mystore.com. So there's nothing on the client that's going to block that request from going through. Now, these server-to-server integrations still rely on first-party cookies, right? They still rely on the first-party cookie to identify that user because this HTTP request is still fundamentally anonymous, right? There's nothing about that request that guarantees that we can tell that Jake is Jake, right? Except for the client ID cookie that we've set, right? All it does is make it so that the client can't block that request because it's a legitimate request going to mystore.com. That is how cookies work. That is the impact of cookies. As you can see, I hope from this discussion it's clear. The impact from a marketing and analytics perspective, it's possible that Facebook or some other ad platforms that are still relying heavily on third-party cookies, not Facebook, definitely not relying heavily on third-party cookies, but some of those ad platforms, maybe they're still relying heavily on third-party cookies. If that's the case, that's on them. They really shouldn't be. That really will not change very much. Google Analytics will be completely unaffected by third-party cookies. Google Analytics does not rely on third-party cookies in any way, shape, or form. And server-to-server integrations don't do anything for third-party cookie integrations, right? Hope you find this useful. Hope it helps you see a little bit of what is going to happen when third-party cookies are depreciated, and hopefully lets you sleep a little bit easier knowing that it's probably not going to impact your analytics and marketing efforts very much. Hope you find this useful. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get more videos like this. We're coming up with a new one on how attribution works from a technical level. We'll do another one on how server-side integrations work. We'll talk about the difference between proxied server-side, which is what you see here, and true server-side. So subscribe to make sure that you get that content when it comes out. Thanks for listening.